Hey there, today we're going to journey back to the heyday of the Disney MGM Studios and Epcot Center with Hal Bowers of the Retro Disney World podcast. You're listening to the Tomorrow Society podcast. Thanks so much for joining me on episode 78 of the Tomorrow Society podcast. I am your host, Dan Heaton. And if you've been listening to the show very long, it probably doesn't surprise you that I really enjoy digging into the history of Walt Disney World. And one of the best resources for doing so is the Retro Disney World podcast. They recently did a 3-part episode on Horizons that was incredible. I had high expectations, and this still blew it out of the water. And the way they dive into history always makes it fun for me to talk to some of the hosts, which is why I'm so excited to have Hal Bowers back on the podcast. And I want to take a minute here to mention their event, Retro Magic, which is happening on October 13th, which has a stunning group of guests, including Bob Gurr and also Rolly Crump through a video interview, Imagineers like Tom K. Morris, and also several guests I've had this summer, Tom Nabby and Jim Sarno. And that's really just the tip of the iceberg of the group of participants they have at this event, which is celebrating the 5th anniversary of Retro WDW. And you can learn more by going to retrowdw.com. I also wanted to mention that I recently was a guest on Rope Drop Radio, which is a very cool podcast that Doug and Derek host. I was on episode 168, and we talked about the past, present, and future of Epcot, and it was a blast. And thanks to Derek and Doug for asking me on and being so cool when we had a fun conversation. And you can easily find that by just searching for Rope Drop Radio on Apple Podcasts or with your preferred provider. So this was a really fun conversation with Hal Bowers. I enjoyed talking with him last year when we went more into his background and how he got into Disney. This is more a deep dive into thoughts on the parks. We do talk about Retro Magic and their podcast, but especially digging into Epcot Center and how could it work today and what's going on with the Hollywood studios and a lot of history. And it was great fun to have a chance to talk to Hal. So let's do it. Here is Hal Bowers. Well, first I want to talk about an event that you guys are doing called Retro Magic, the 5th anniversary of your podcast. It's happening in Orlando, October 12th and 13th. And I know I talked to Brian Miles, who does it a little while ago, and I know you guys have been looking to do a type of event, like a big event. So how did this one end up coming together?
We'd like to do a large event every couple of years, typically on the off years when, Disney's not doing a D23 event in Orlando. So with D23 being in Anaheim this year, the big expo, it seemed like this was a good opportunity to do it. 5 years is a nice milestone. We looked at potentially doing an MGM-centric one, but the May timeframe just really didn't make sense, I think, for a lot of people traveling. Tons of people travel in the fall anyways. And with Epcot Forever coming in and with Illuminations going away, it seemed like there was an opportunity to do it in the fall timeframe. So we thought, well, this is our chance. It's like, let's get it together and let's go big and let's make it happen. So that's what we did. And we called on, some people that we've had on our show in the past, and we've made some new contacts. And I think we have a very nice broad selection of folks to talk who I think everyone will find very interesting, and some people that don't get to Orlando very often. So I think it's going to be fun. It's going to be fun for us, and it's certainly going to be fun for the audience too.
Yeah, I mean, I look at the guest list and it's like, Bob Gurr, who I know was involved with one of your other events, and Tom Nabby, and Tom K. Morris, who's a fascinating guy, and like Jim Sarno. And then I know you talked to Roy Crump. So how did you zone in on who was going to be on the guest list? Because even what I just listed is a very small percentage of who you have on there.
Yeah, some of it was, I think we found the people that we thought would be fun. And maybe some folks, like I said, some folks that don't get an opportunity to come to Orlando a lot. We tend to see, not a lot of people come to Orlando anyways. It is so far from California. You get some, Tony Baxter's been a couple of times, and some folks that go to the IAAPA convention then go and do some of the Disney things. I mean, to get a guy like Jim Sarno, who, is an unknown, but had two really big, impactful things that he did for Epcot that people love, in Smart One, and then the fountain in the Land Pavilion, to be able to talk to him. And the funny thing that we found out about him when we did the episode, you call someone and you say, hey, we'd like to interview you for this. It's like, you don't know. Maybe the person's going to be interesting. Maybe they're not going to be interesting. Maybe they've got great stories. Maybe it was just a job for them. But Jim turned out to be just a really fascinating and fun guy. And with his background, not only with that stuff, but also working on Teddy Ruxpin and a couple of other things like Sid and Marty Krofft, he just turned out to be a really interesting fellow. And I know we know not everybody listens to podcasts. Hopefully the people that are listening to your podcast may listen to ours and other podcasts.
I think so.
Yeah. But there's some people, that's not their thing, and I understand that. So, it gives those people an opportunity to get to hear some of these stories too from these folks. So I think that's really the thing. It's like we're taking the podcast live, so maybe some people that don't sit through podcasts can enjoy getting this content in a different way.
It's funny you mentioned Jim, because based on your show, I actually reached out to him and I talked with him last week. This probably will come out yours totally coincidentally. His show will be a few weeks before this one. So, and I totally agree. He was going on about his friendship with some legendary Imagineers and such. So I'm really pumped that you have him for that event. And
yeah,
it's going to be great.
Yeah, it turned out he had a connection with Rolly Crump that I think we'll reveal. If it's not revealed on your show, it's like we'll reveal it at our event. That just cracked us up when we were talking to Rolly, because we didn't know it existed, and all of a sudden he's like, "Oh yeah, that guy, I know that guy," and then he proceeded to tell us some really funny stories. So
yeah, that's a great tease for your event.
Yes. Speaking to Rolly was amazing. We got to spend about 2.5 hours with him, which was far more than we expected. And the thing that will be different about his interview that we'll be able to show in Florida that's different from a lot of the other ones is we didn't really talk about Disneyland. It's like, since this is a Walt Disney World centric event, it's like we really focused on, Disney World questions, his work in the Magic Kingdom and Epcot. And then we also asked about some of his graphic design work and his typography work, since that's what I'm into. And we hit on a lot of things that a lot of people don't talk to him about. So he was really engaged with that, and that made us more engaged, and we got a lot of really great stories, some rare stuff and some unique things, and some clarifications on some other stories that we've heard before. It's wonderful, and it stinks that he couldn't be there. We really did want to bring him to Orlando, but he's just at an age where he's not traveling anymore. So we went to him in order to get this. And, as we find, he's one of the last two Imagineers that worked with Walt directly, I think. So, a chance to be able to talk to him and capture his stories for everyone to hear is, I feel, really important. It was a wonderful opportunity, and we just can't wait to share that with everyone.
That's the thing about Rolly, because I sometimes forget. I know obviously he worked on the land and such, but I forget sometimes that they brought him back, because he left and they came back and did some things for Epcot. And then obviously Mr. Toad's Wild Ride, which I loved as a kid, that he was so involved with at Disney World.
Yeah.
And so I'm excited to hear that, because we hear so much about It's a Small World and about his contributions to the Haunted Mansion. But on this side of it, if he's beyond just the land and such, if you said, what did he do for Epcot? I'd be like, I don't really know that well, which is sad, because I've read the book and everything. I still don't know that much.
We'll enlighten you in some other ways, because we found one thing that wasn't in the book that he told us about. So we have, I don't know, I don't want to call it an exclusive, but we have a more complicated piece of the puzzle than what we had before, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, and I wanted to mention one more thing. You also have you're gonna have some performances like Tammy Tuckey, who I know has been on your show, singing with the original singer Ali Sorno of Two Brothers.
Yeah,
how exciting is that?
Oh, that's gonna be. I swear that's going to be one of those moments that just makes people, the hair on the back of people's necks stand up. That's going to be so cool when that happens. Yeah, and we also have, if you remember, those of you who are old enough who remember in FutureCom in the AT&T Pavilion in Communicore, there was a sort of a multimedia wall that had all these little intricate wooden figures. It was called the Age of Information, and there was a song that played, and then all these little figures moved around in different ways, and it sort of told the story of like future technology that AT&T was bringing, like smartphones and fiber optics and teleconference calls. Well, Todd somehow or another managed to find the granddaughter of the husband and wife artists that actually did that display. Their name was Einzel. So it turns out their granddaughter is a musician. So she's going to come and perform that song from the display, and we're going to run the video behind her of like the complete like step-by-step run through of that show with her singing live. So that's going to be another just really neat little cool thing that we can pull off. And I feel that's one of the things that we can do. You know, like D23 has to have a very broad audience. They have a more broad audience. You know, they have to pick things and performers and speakers that are going to appeal to a wider group of people. We can just go full nerd. and so like that's a super obscure piece of Epcot, but in our opinion, really cool and something that's been overlooked. So to be able to take with this and both of Tammy's thing, you know, take something from 40 years ago, bring it to the current age and put it out in front of people live, it's going to be a really unique experience.
Yeah, I mean, if you're going to zone in on kind of nerdy Epcot things, I think talking to me is where we want to be, I think, here. So, I mean, the thing is, I didn't really remember that much, the Age of Information. I remember you guys did your Communicore episodes, and you posted that video, and I was like, what is that? Because I heard the song from, like, old audio and stuff, but I never really put two and two together. I'm like, how? Because I remember, I was a kid, I remember Build Your Roller Coaster and the Travel Port, but I had no memory of that. It's one of the like more unique, cool things I can remember seeing.
I think it's one of those things. I mean, even as I was probably 12 or 13 when I went to Epcot for the first time. And, you know I looked at it. I know I walked by it. I might have stared at it for a couple of minutes, but compared to all the electronic stuff and building your own roller coaster, like it just wasn't cool to me. At that age. Now I'm kicking myself. I wish I would have spent more time looking at it. And when you watch the video, you're like, oh, wow, that's actually really cool. Look at all the little stuff it does. But because it was made out of wood and the song was more quaint, it's like I didn't pay any attention to it, or probably not as much attention to it as I should have. It's nice to be able to appreciate it again, even though it's gone somewhere.
Yeah, it's cool to have that video, because there are things, not every little thing, and I hate to call it little, but thing from the early days of Epcot is so well documented. So the fact that you're able to see that is great.
Yeah, very much so.
All right. Well, speaking of the podcast, you've also done recently 2 episodes about Horizons, which are massive episodes. I think you called them the Prologue and the Promise, based on, you know, the famous picture that you go by for the first few years, at least, at the exit. And I know you're going to do one more. So what's it been like to do those podcasts and really dig into that?
For me, this is, you know, I love this kind of research, and I'll have a lot of personal connections with that ride from riding it so much, and the whole business with, you know, Hoot Gibson and jumping out a couple of times, getting up close and personal with it. But even to just stop and go back and start digging into just every little minute detail of it. And, you know, everything in that ride meant something. There was nothing there by accident. There was nothing there by chance or just to look good. It's like the tiniest details. Like one of the things that I talk about on the podcast is when the girl is talking to the beach boy and not doing her homework. There's like a model of a nuclear isotope that's spinning on the screen next to her. and it says on the screen what that isotope is. And when I went and looked it up, I actually found a research paper from 1981 talking about that isotope and how important it could be for things like thin film technology and flexible screens and medical. And someone at that time, when they were putting that ride together, they could have picked an oxygen atom and thrown it up there or anything. But they actually did. Somebody dug in deep and found something that would have been important, actually was mysterious now, but by 2076, when Horizons takes place, it's like it would have been something that would have been taught in school because of the importance of it. And just, you find stuff like that and you're just blown away by every control panel on a computer or on a screen. It's like had all this little detail of volume controls and sound levels, and like the menu that the guy was holding in the restaurant in Sea Castle had lorem ipsum text for the foods, but there was this whole little computer display stuff next to it. And down at the bottom, there was a little thing where as you made your selections on this touch screen, it would actually show you like the price of what you were buying or what you were ordering down at the bottom. And you couldn't see that from the ride. You couldn't. They're like, the detail was for nobody, but like there it was. Somebody took time to like make that prop and figure that out and do it. And that's just the level of detail in that ride is excruciating. And it was, for me, it was a pleasure to like go and find the meaning of it all. That was it was a lot. Oh my God, it was a lot of work, but that was a really fun episode to do for that reason. And yeah, if you want to nerd out on Horizons, listeners, go find that episode. We recorded our third part of it last week, so we're in the editing process now to get that done and out. And we're gonna finish up the ride, choose your tomorrow, and then some fiber optics and the painting, and then sort of the aftermath. And just one of the things that, no spoiler for the podcast, but one of the things that we got into was like just how long it took to shoot those like 15-second clips where you would pick what future you wanted to get back to. So you could pick between space, sea, and air. These were done by large scale models. So like they literally filled an aircraft hangar with a model, a couple of 100 feet long, 60 feet high. A camera basically flew through it on a motion control system, frame by frame. It took them almost a year and a half to build the sets, the models, and then it took them another like 6 to 9 months to shoot them. And all of this for 15 seconds that you might see one time if you rode the ride one time. And that just blows my mind that they would take 2 years to make a 15-second experience on this one ride, filled with all kinds of other experiences. Like, I don't know who would do that today. I don't know if Disney would do that today. It's just mind-boggling, the work that they put into that pavilion. It's hard to appreciate the amount of that effort that went into it until you sit there and just look at all of it and go, holy crap, that was a lot of work.
Yeah, I experienced Horizons quite a bit and then have watched the ride videos and the audio and all that. And I was like, I've read about it. I read George McGinnis's book. I feel like I've got the gist of this. And then you guys went through it like scene by scene. And I remember the isotope one too, but so many examples like that. And I was like, holy cow, this is stunning. But I think when people talk about details and what Disney did, a lot of it is like hidden Mickeys. And so, nothing wrong with that. That's great stuff, things like that. But I even think of like, Spaceship Earth with all the authenticity and the experts they brought in. And then, like you said, with Horizons, things that they put in that we can't see. But I feel like somehow you kind of sense it. Like when somebody puts that much care into it, like I didn't know that menu was exactly that way. But somehow you can kind of, because when you go in an attraction that doesn't have that, you kind of feel like something's off here. I don't know what it is. And there, I never felt that. And I think that's why people loved it so much.
There's this weird thing, I think it's in computer graphics, where they talk about when they're doing renderings of stuff, like Pixar, when they're doing the renderings, they actually have stuff where the computer is figuring out what the air looks like, even though the air is in theory transparent. They're taking atmosphere into account when they're doing their rendering. And so it feels much more richer than if it was not done, like some of their competitors do. And I think that's the same kind of thing with like Horizons and the level of detail. You may not be able to see it, but maybe you can sense it.
I could definitely sense it. And there's still attractions now that you can feel, maybe not with nuclear isotopes, but you can feel that level of detail, some of the classic attractions. But that one stands out for some reason. And so now I have to ask one more question on this. So you talk about how it was a lot of research and how you found all this information. How do you find that information? That's what because I know you could study frame by frame on the picture, but there has to be other ways. Like, where are you going without revealing any super secrets or anything?
No, that is a very good question. And so I'll tell you, this is good for anybody who likes to study stuff. There are some sources. There's a lot of things like DisneyDocs.net, which is Ted Linhart, like his site, like he's been buying stuff and putting it up for study. It's like invaluable resource. There are just randomly, if you know how to find things on Google, you can find stuff. I keep a running list of things that I'm interested in on eBay. I look for eBay auctions, and I don't necessarily have to buy the documents on eBay auctions, because sometimes they'll just take pictures of every page of whatever the thing is that they're auctioning off, and you can get all the information straight from there. So I spend a lot of time on eBay looking at stuff and saving screenshots of it for reference later. So it takes time and dedication to do that, but it's doable. There are some things in libraries, like in the Orlando Public Library, that you can access, copies of Eyes and Ears, and some of the older Disney magazines sometimes have good resources. Sometimes you'll be I've been good enough to like run into a former cast member who, has like their training documentation, or occasionally we'll have people, send us things like Horizons 1 on Twitter. Matt, it's like he actually sent us, and I think someone else too, sent us a document that basically was like an inventory list for the ride. So I was able to go through that and look at, it was like, all right, this person is wearing this clothing, that kind of clothing, this kind of clothing. They have, 4 plates and 3 dishes and 2 things in this. It's like there's a projector that is this kind of projector on this scene and that kind of projector on that scene. This documentation is starting to get out into the wild. We're supporting that too. As we find stuff, we're putting it out. And then with this one, it's like the Mesa Verde Times, Hoot Gibson's website. It's like just his close-up pictures of stuff were an extraordinary resource to be able to go back and look at stills. And I had taken a bunch of photos and a bunch of video when the ride was open. So I had a wealth of information to pick from. So yeah, there's for a while too, there's just been people that just like sort of trade stuff back and forth, on the internet, the nerds. So yeah, that's kind of the big ways. And it's like, if somebody wants something, ask me. I'm more than happy to share the stuff that we have. And that's one of the things that we're doing with the Lake Buena Vista Historical Societies. We are now in the process of figuring out what software platforms we should be using to catalog, archive, and publish a lot of the documentation that we have. So we have volunteers who have worked, in libraries and with archival retrieval systems that are now making some software selections for us. And we're going to make the investment where we need to in order to get this stuff, out on the internet where people can use it as a research tool. So I'm really excited about that too.
Yeah, I think it's great that now that you guys have the Lake Buena Vista Historical Society, the nonprofit, that it just seems like you'll even have more ability, hopefully, to even, you were already doing so many amazing things documenting it, but now it's like on another level, it sounds like.
Yeah, it's going to be being able to share this stuff. To me, that's because if someone didn't share it with me, I wouldn't know. My feeling has been, I've collected pretty decent amount of stuff over the years, books and articles and things. You know, I'm going to be dead eventually. I'm 51. I'm on the downside of the slope. So, you know, I want to get this information that I have and share it with everyone. And I could give it to one person, but if we can put it out to where everybody can access it, I think that's a lot better. So that's what we're going for. That's really the thing that we're trying to do here.
No, I think it's awesome, and I'm excited to see what you guys are doing in the future, including the Horizons episode. But beyond that, even some of the info you're doing there. So since we're talking about Horizons, let's talk a bit about, you know, Epcot Center. I feel like, I don't know if it's just being on Twitter and like in that community, but that there is so much attention on Horizons and on Epcot Center. And part of it, I think, is Disney is coming out so much with their transformation and all that about Epcot and what they're going to do, which, you know, who knows what's coming there. But I'm curious too, people look back, I think, and at older attractions and at a lot of different parks and such, but there's something about that about Epcot Center that is drawing people differently. And I know you had a lot of experience going there when you were younger, when it was starting up. So like, what do you think back to when you're kind of looking back kind of fondly on that time with the park?
Yeah, it's weird. I have some very specific memories of things. For all the times I went, even as, like I said, when I first went, I was probably 12 years old, which is pretty good age for that. You know, you're young enough that you still have that sense of wonder, but you're also smart enough that you can process some of the stuff that you're seeing. I mean, the technology, yes, we had home computers. I did. I had a home computer. I had an Atari 800 and, you know, there were TRS-80s and things out there. But like the level of what you saw, you know, that you actually got to touch, like being able to use, you know, and the earliest version of the touch screen available in World Key, it's like, that was astounding to us. I mean, fully expected. I think we knew the world was technological. We were hungry for that. It wasn't, you know, we weren't like our grandparents where everything was scary. It's like we were actively looking for what's the newer, better thing. So when you got to see all of the technology there that you were really seeing for the first time, it was just amazing. I don't know how you go. I think that's one of the things. It's like there's no going back to that. It's like, I don't know if Disney were to do something today in the vein of the original Epcot, if they would have access to that cutting edge technology like they had then, because they were working with AT&T and Sperry and all these people. But it was just crazy. You know, it was this wonderful mix of high tech and Disney. And, you know, their storytelling, it's like they're fun, but mixed in with this technology that was just, I mean, it was mind blowing. So that, it's like I have a very specific memory of being in the post-show of the GM Pavilion, and they had a little, I think it was supposed to be a touchscreen system that was going to go into one of their cars. And I did find what car it went into. Now I can't remember. It was like a LeBaron or something, but it was like this little green screen. I think it went into one of their Corvettes. They had it out where you could demo it. And you could turn the air conditioning, like you could control the temperature by touchscreen. So you could like raise the temperature up and down, and you could turn on the radio and play with the radio, and it was all touchscreen. And I remember standing there, and from Steely Dan, there was the singer Donald Fagen did a solo album in the early 80s called The Nightfly. And it was all sort of his recollections of being excited about the future in the 1950s. And there was a song that was actually popular on the radio called IGY, What a Wonderful World. And I remember sitting there and like playing with that stereo, and that song came on, which is about this optimistic future. And I was just standing there, and I thought to myself at like 12 or 14 years old, it's like, damn, this is the future right here. This is it. I am living in the future at this moment. Like, it can't get in life. Life is going to be so good when we have this.
Steely Dan and the future. It's just what could be better with that? Yeah. I went there first. I think I was 8. I mean, I'm 43 now. I went when I was 8 in 84, I think. I had no idea. My parents said, "Hey, we're going to this park, Epcot." I was like, "Oh, great." Maybe they showed a picture of Spaceship Earth or whatever. And I just remember being like, what is this place? Like, you walk in and you're just like, okay, we're going to go on this. And then you go in Universe of Energy and you're like, oh, what is this? It's like a 45-minute thing. And, and just like every single pavilion was like that. And like you said, that Trans Center, like, we were watching some show, like where they were the water engine show. And I was like, what is going on? Like, you're looking up and there's all those little screens. And I know it sounds a little bit like just nostalgia. Like, I get a little nervous if I'm too just like, things were great then, they're not now. But I think the point you're making, though, about what Disney can do, like, it still amazes me they even made Epcot Center. And I know they were trying to honor Walt's vision in some way. They had a lot of the older Imagineers and Card Walker and everyone in charge. But could any theme park do anything like that now? And like you said, corporate sponsorship and technology. But even if somehow they had access, I don't know how that would even work. That's the problem. That it's like, what do they do?
Yeah, it's kind of the amazing thing about the more I read about that Epcot, the more I'm trying to wrap my head around, the whys of it. Like, why does this exist? What were the conditions that made this happen? And it's what I think I know at this point kind of goes like this. So at some point, Epcot was supposed to be a real working city in Walt's mind, and he had quite a lot of it figured out. And, George McGinnis and a bunch of people were working on concepts for what it should be. The way it was presented to the state of Florida was that there was a city of sorts, a residential area, surrounding a central core that would have an international shopping place in it and a convention center and a really nice modern hotel. And there would be satellite facilities that would have anything that industry would want to showcase. And that was the big thing there. It's like, this is a showcase for American industry. So they could bring in new kinds of power plants or new kinds of automobile manufacturing, and people would come here, to not only live, but also to like see, American ingenuity in action. And that was kind of the core of that idea. And then at some point in the mid-70s, they just realized there is no way we are going to build a city. It's like, Walt could get this done, but none of us have that charisma. And there's my David Lee Roth, like, just a gigolo video, like, coming back to me. Nobody's Walt. Like, nobody could sell it the way that he could. There is some early communication from Card Walker where I almost feel like there's this desperation of like, we need another thing at Walt Disney World. What are we going to do? And so I think they looked at, the World's Fair model. And the other thing is, like, they were a cash poor company. They spent a lot of money to build, the Magic Kingdom. And then we got into the gas crisis and they weren't able to do a lot of the phase 2 stuff that they wanted to do for the Magic Kingdom, but then they were feeling pressure to build Epcot. So then they're like, oh crap, how are we going to pay for this? And then, someone said, well, let's look at the World's Fair model of, having companies come in and, pay for this. So the costs are offset and then we can actually afford to do it. And I think that's where we started to see this. So I think there was a need to build something else there to get tourism. They wanted another park. They needed someone else to pay for it. But then they went and did something which is very unexpected, which is they started setting up all these Epcot conferences and bringing in companies to talk about, problems and ideas. And yes, on one hand, they were fishing for people to become sponsors. But on the other hand, they were legitimately also like trying to get people together to talk about problems that society was facing and trying to solve trying to come up with solutions for what those problems. And the very sort of earliest version of Epcot as a theme center before it became Epcot Center, we know, they were really trying hard to be very serious with an Epcot Institute where people would do research. They were still wanting to do sort of these industrial park type things. But they were trying to open up a forum where people could ask difficult questions and have experts try to come up with answers to solve real problems that then people could potentially take back to the communities that they lived in order to implement. And this is a very altruistic concept, very, very strange. That idea didn't quite work out. And what we ended up with was a theme park. But even in that, there was so much work done, with the corporate sponsors to see what they were doing that was new. And in some cases, even, a lot of people rag on Exxon for being, a lot about petroleum. But if you actually break down the amount of time in that attraction, other than like riding through the dinosaurs, but when a film is on, it's like, there's pretty much equal time for nuclear and solar and all the other technology, fission, everything else that they wanted to talk about. So it wasn't super duper heavy handed. It was heavy handed enough to get them to like put up the money to sponsor it. So it's, in some cases you have this kind of unholy marriage of like art and commerce in order to get it done. But I feel like given the circumstances that the designers of Epcot were handed, they did just an extraordinary job taking something that could have been much less than it turned out to be and making something that was very important, felt important, felt like it had gravitas and was big. And like you said, I don't know who could do that today. I don't know if and the market then was very different too. People didn't mind being confronted by that. And there was, at that time, it was like the World's Fair in Knoxville was also going on. I think people were still, with internet not being around and having some television, it's like there was perhaps a more receptive audience for that kind of park. Now that I can literally go on YouTube and like look at every kind of solar panel that's available, or, every kind of research that's being done about, I can go see stuff, 20 miles under the sea and things where they're finding ships and all kinds of stuff. So I don't know if we can have that kind of park anymore. There could be a way to do it. I'm not going to say there's not a way to do it, but I agree. It's tough. I don't know if you can go back. I just don't know if you can go back.
Yeah. And that's the trick. I can't really picture, and I don't mean to pick on them, but like Bob Chapek getting up there at D23 in August and saying, we're going to have some Epcot conferences and we're going to talk about the challenges with climate change and everything. I'd be like, yeah. And people, the audience even would be like, what are we doing? So it's not just the company. It's like, I can see that too. But, for me, I appreciate that there are still some, like you see it in Living with the Land, or you see it in parts of Spaceship Earth and in certain parts of it, but other parts not so much. But it's a tough one. And plus, with the rise of just local science museums and aquariums and everything else, it's just a different market. I would like to see, though, the park still have some sort of unique theme to it or unique approach, even if it's not what I would pick. Something that separates it from not becoming just, exactly the same. And that's true of any park. That's true of the Hollywood Studios, too, where I just don't want it to be exactly the same as every other thing. The trick I think they're probably struggling with is how do they do that and kind of serve their corporate shareholder interests, which are so different than they were in 1980 or something.
Well, yeah, that's also true. I think when Cardwalker sent that stuff out, he legitimately was going to the Imagineers in 82 and saying, or 74 or 75, and saying, okay, guys, what do we do?
Yeah.
We, as a head of a corporation, he did not have an agenda other than you guys go off and make something entertaining that people will want to go to here. Whereas I feel like now there's probably someone who has figured out, the statistics and the math behind, well, we have this movie coming out on this day and this made this much money and the sequel is coming out then. So let's plan on doing a synergistic activation where we have this property that comes into here, and then it's good for DVD sales and this line of business, and we can sell this food and all this other stuff too. I think the needs are perhaps a little bit more corporate driven, which is even a shift from the 1980s, because I thought it was fascinating reading more about Dick Nunis and his role in making requests for rides. which, I always just assumed it's like, Mark Davis is sitting around and he starts drawing some pirates, or, Walt says like, oh, go make me one of these things. And, that was probably true during Walt's time. But after Walt passed, people like Dick Nunis were making a concerted effort to look at crowd flows in the park and try to figure out tactically where you should build another attraction and what the capacity of that attraction should be based on the needs of like moving people from one side of the park to the other side of the park. Like one of the reasons that Tony Baxter, or probably the reason that Tony Baxter did Splash Mountain, is because Dick Nunis identified the need for a larger attraction in that upper quadrant of Frontierland to try to draw people out and away from Tomorrowland, which was getting bogged down once Space Mountain opened up, because Tomorrowland was clogged and that side of the park was underutilized. So he wanted something else over there, and he specifically asked for a log flume. It's like he had been trying to get a log flume built even at the Magic Kingdom as early as 1972, 73, which is why that was part of the plans for Western River Expedition and Thunder Mesa. It's like there would have been a log flume in there. And even in the documentation that we have, even as the idea of Thunder Mesa kind of died away, it's like he still wanted a log flume built in the Magic Kingdom. And it literally took 10 years to make it happen, at Disneyland and then finally in the Magic Kingdom. But it was a business decision, but for guest satisfaction, that we're making decisions about where to put things. And now it seems like it's just this very arbitrary, like, well, okay, Maelstrom's old and we need something to get more people to come in the summertime because we need to fill up the hotels. So let's put a Frozen ride in Epcot. and that's how Frozen gets there, I suppose.
Yeah. And that's Dick Nunis is so interesting. What I always hear is that he was obsessed with capacity, like obsessed with this must have 2,500 people or 2,000 per hour or whatever. But your point, though, because if you think about Disneyland and the Magic Kingdom and Epcot, they all are situated kind of in a circular way. It's very easy to get around. Yes, Epcot has a ridiculous amount of walking, but it's not like I talked about with the details. It's one of those things where you're like, things just kind of fit together right. And then you look at Disney MGM Studios and you go, yeah, the layout's a little weird. And that's kind of how it is with DCA and with the studios in Paris. I mean, some of the other parks. And now, like you mentioned, it's completely different. But the parks themselves, it's not just about the like nostalgia for Epcot Center and what was done. It's just that there's different thoughts. That to me is, I feel like should be like Theme Park 101. But I know, like you said, there's so many more analyses about marketing and synergies than I will ever know. I'm sure that.
Oh, and they have competition that they never had before. Down the street now is, Universal Studios and Islands of Adventure. And also just the way that Disney thinks about other people in the area. Huge sea change with Michael Eisner coming in, because I'll go back to Dick Nunis. It's like during his time, Walt and he had this philosophy that, like Knott's Berry Farm wasn't your competition. It's like they were a good neighbor, and together it's like you were pulling more tourism into that area based on all of the attractions that were there, and you were helping each other out by coexisting. And when they came into Florida, it's like it was the same thing. It's like, they did this magazine called Vacation Land that Disney would print and put everywhere. And it had a lot of information about Disney attractions in it, but it also had full page ads for Busch Gardens and Cypress Gardens and every other little attraction in Florida up and down the seaboard, because it was part of Disney's good neighbor policy that, supporting tourism overall was a good thing. And then when Eisner comes in, it was, nope, we don't have friends. Those people aren't your friends. Those people are your enemies. And we're going to build, an animal park. We're going to put stuff in that maybe keeps people from going to SeaWorld for a day. They always say that one of the reasons that, and I don't know if it's true, but they always say one of the reasons that they ended up doing the seas was to like make people less likely to go to SeaWorld. Certainly, Animal Kingdom has a lot to do with keeping people from going to Busch Gardens in Tampa, which was an hour away. It's like, that's another reason to keep them. I mean, MGM Studios is literally Universal Studios announcing, hey, we're going to do a theme park in Florida. And Eisner going, oh, no, you're not, because we're going to open ours first, so nobody goes to yours. I mean, that's war. So it's a very different philosophy now. That's one of the things Brian on our podcast always points out. It's like, you could try to make Epcot, but when people are coming to the Central Florida area, that's not what they're looking for now. They're looking for stuff that's more like what are the things at Universal. They're looking for the newer stuff. We had a very nice, small, quaint little attraction in Orlando called Florida's Splendid China, and it lasted 2 years, maybe. The little quaint stuff, there's just not a market for it anymore. Cypress Gardens has died, now come back as Legoland. Silver Springs died. A lot of the older, smaller, more quaint, old-fashioned Florida attractions it's just not what people want now. And maybe that will change. Maybe the pendulum will swing in the other direction again, and we'll build more of those types of things. But just that's not what the market wants right now. So you can't fight that.
Yeah, and I think, Michael Eisner is he's one of those things where he did a lot of things, like a lot of things that I love about what's in Walt Disney World now, he was involved with. But then, like you said, Sam Genoway wrote a couple of books about Universal, and there's one that's like Disney versus Universal that talks about how Sam basically thinks that if Michael Eisner hadn't pushed so hard for Disney MGM Studios, that Universal might never have built Universal. They might have decided, because they had the land, MCA had bought the land, but they had announced that they were going to do it, but because he announced MGM, Universal was like, oh, now we're not going to just do a studio tour. We're going to do King Kong and Jaws and Earthquake, and really, I know it had so many problems in the beginning, but really try to make something even better, because with everything working, it was more ambitious and grander than what Disney MGM was, also because he kind of stole a lot of their ideas too.
Right. Yeah. It sure seems that way.
Yeah. In theory, it's not proven.
Yeah. They certainly looked at things that were in other studio parks, and with Universal and Hollywood being the biggest one, they were like, oh yeah, we need one of those, and we're going to need a stunt show, and we're going to need one of these things, and we're going to need one of those things. So,
but I wanted to ask you, because I know from an early Retro Disney World podcast episode that you actually visited. I visited that summer as a kid, but you visited the Disney MGM Studios on its first day.
Yeah.
So I'd love to hear, I know you've already told this story on your podcast, but I'd love to hear a little bit about that experience here.
And again, it was Hoot Gibson and I and my girlfriend at the time and another one of our friends from work and Hoot's brother. It was a new park. We were very excited about what it could be. At that time, they did not do a lot of advanced publicity about what was going to be there. There was not, Epcot had that very famous teaser book, the sort of landscaped one that went into some detail. They had a couple of pages in brochures, but not anything that really explained what anything was. We just couldn't wait to see what could possibly be there. Because we didn't, it's a new Disney park. It's the first new Disney park in 10 years. It's like, this is going to have to be amazing. So we planned to be there on opening day. We were all college students. We did not have a lot of money. I think I had a 2-day pass, like a 2-day ticket pass that I needed to upgrade. It was a Magic Kingdom Epcot pass, and I think I had to turn it in that morning in order to upgrade it to one that would actually get me into Disney MGM, because my admission media did not have that. I don't think they had an annual pass holder program at that point. So a little bit of a different thing. But so we planned to go. We didn't have any idea when we should go. We wanted to be there as early as possible. We thought there might be a chance that we would be let in first, which is in hindsight ridiculous because that is a very staged PR event, as we found out. We decided to meet up in Lakeland and then drive over. And just to be safe, because we had no idea, my expectation and our expectations were everyone is going to be so excited about this new park. It's we're going to show up there at, 1 o'clock in the morning, and there are going to be cars, out on World Drive, like down for a mile and a half because people are going to be so excited about this. And I think we read later on that like people were doing this for the Epcot Center opening. It's like there was a pretty big backup the night before. So we went and we got there about 1 a.m. and there was nobody. There were maybe 4 or 5 cars when we showed up. The main entrance off of World Drive that took you down there, they had some cones in front of it, so you couldn't drive in. But like by and large, there was nobody there. And oddly enough, and I guess this is just the difference in time, it's like there was almost no traffic on World Drive at all. It was pretty dead. So we pulled off to the side of the road and started chatting with people. And then at some point, someone from Disney security came by and stopped and looked at us like we were insane for being there. It was probably 2:00 in the morning by then. And they wanted us to drive away. They were just like, you need to leave. We're like, no, we're waiting for this. And I guess it just didn't occur. Again, I guess everyone had forgotten in the 10 years since Epcot. No, less than that.
7 years.
Yeah. I guess everyone just forgot that people wanted to do this. They were not prepared at all. They had no plan. No one anticipated anybody coming early. So they had to get on a radio and make a lot of calls back and forth. They were in fear for our lives because we were out milling about next to World Drive. And I mean, there was literally nobody drive, and who'd actually got out and laid down in the middle of World Drive just to make a point. Eventually they talked to some people and figured out they should have us, move off of the main drive and down into the road that led you up to the parking booths. So probably about 3:00 or so, they let us down there. And they just had us stay there, and they didn't want us to get out of the car. A few people had to be like, look, my kid's got to pee. We're going to have to let him go into the bushes. So they acquiesced and let him do that. And we were stuck there for about 3 hours until 6 a.m. And then finally at 6 a.m., they let us move from that side road into the parking lot itself. Since we actually beat the people at the parking things, we didn't have to pay for parking that morning. So that was, big savings there. And then they want us to stay in this area, and we were stuck there. I think I can't remember if the park opened at 8:30 or 9, but around 6:37, the normal people who wanted to be there started to show up, and they went in and they got parked right up front, right next to the front gates. And we were still stuck in the back, even as other people were showing up, because no one had authorized us to be able to leave yet. So I think finally we had to start flagging somebody down and say hey, those people can go in. Can we go in now? Finally, they let us go in. That was just this. I mean, we're not even at 9:00 yet. So we go up, we exchange our tickets. We saw Bob Hope. We saw Michael Eisner going around, and they were looking for the person to be the first family. There was a family that was with us right earlier in the morning. And I think we actually tried to get someone's attention to say these people were here, these people have been here since 1:00 in the morning, but it was purely done by appearance. Disney found the family that they felt looked like they should be the first family and plucked them out of the crowd and then took them in to do that business. So it was turned out to be a completely staged event. And as have now gone back and read about the other openings, that's exactly what they do. So wish we would have known that earlier. We could have saved ourselves a lot of trouble. But it was really cool. We had no expectations. They opened the gates finally, and we just ran. We just ran to the first thing that looked like an attraction, because we didn't even know what the attractions were. We grabbed the maps as we were walking up, but we literally had no clue, where's the entrance to the Great Movie Ride. So we found something that looked like it was an attraction, and we went to Superstar Television And I ended up getting picked to be the first person to take a pie in the face in the Three Stooges segment of that. And we were all, hot and tired and just, but that was great. That was super fun to do that. In hindsight, we should have went to the Great Movie Ride first, because after that, the line for the Great Movie Ride was absolutely enormous. And out in the hot sun, we got on everything that day, which you could do because it was, it literally was somewhere between a half and a full day park. It was much smaller then. There were interesting things like the backlot tour was literally like 3 hours of you separated away from the rest of the park. Yeah, good.
As a 13-year-old, I was on that.
Yeah. Now, we'll say there was a place where you could stop and pee and get something to eat. It wasn't like you'd go and do the tram tour and see Catastrophe Canyon and the Golden Girls house and Herbie and all that stuff. And then after that, you got off and there was a place to get some food and use the restroom and get some drinks and stuff. And then you would go into the post-production tour. Then you were in there for like another hour or so. But that was all, again, it was really cool that it was that park, in the same way that Epcot was kind of like the perfect park for the zeitgeist of the 1980s. It's like, I think MGM was the perfect park for the zeitgeist of the early later 80s and early 90s. It's like everybody was really interested in movies, how they were made. There were, shows on television. I remember watching TV shows about special effects and how they were done. It was all just fascinating. And, Hollywood was in a big resurgence. People were going back to the movies again. Touchstone was making really good films left and right. People were in love with Bette Midler movies and like all the crazy comedies that they were doing then. So it's like people were super, it was almost oddly enough, the way people are excited about Marvel now and like people want to see a Marvel attractions and theme parks. It's like people really wanted to see, Disney movies and how they were made in theme parks. And, perfect example is, so did you ever get to ride the Bee in the special effects thing for Honey, I Shrunk the Kids?
I never rode the Bee. No, I mean, we did it multiple times because we went 89 and I think 90 or 91 and stuff, but I never rode the Bee. I didn't get to do that.
I never got to do it either, but you could tell for like every kid who got to do that, like that was the greatest moment in their life. Because everybody had seen Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, because that was, that was a huge box office success then. Disney was on the upswing and like, you could just tell like people thought that was the greatest thing ever. It was perfect for that time. Roger Rabbit was a big hit. So anything that was Roger Rabbit that was there, that was huge. Indiana Jones with like the stunt show, it's like, that was really cool. It's like, it really hit on all cylinders. Like everything that was there, was really appreciated.
Yeah, I agree. It was, it was so different at the time, just like you said, because it was pre-DVD explosion in the late 90s when that really took off in the early 2000s. So getting the chance, like, yeah, I remember seeing the stunt show. And at the very beginning, I think, because we went that summer and they were still working out the kinks in the stunt show because I know that was fast tracked. And even so, it was very choppy and stuff. And they were really pushing that they were actually filming a movie, which I don't think they do as much now, but which I was like, really, they're filming something. But especially as a kid, as a teenager, I was like, man, the stuff's exploding and the spikes are coming out and the whole deal. It's tricky. It's weird because I look at Epcot and I could totally logically understand why they're not going to do that now. And I'm not expecting that they're going to have a 3-hour walking tour now. But it's hard for me because I look at the park now and it's like, it's such a mishmash where there I felt like you can look and kind of laugh and say about what was there. But like you said, it was great for the time. How it's evolved is kind of interesting to me because I still don't really think they know what to do with it, despite having Galaxy's Edge opening and Toy Story Land and Mickey and Minnie and then closing the Great Movie Ride. I look at that park and I'm like, where is that park going in 5 or 10 years? I have no idea.
Yeah, it is really, I don't know if to call it leftover land now. Like it's the themeless theme park. It's like, I don't know how they're going to choose to try to define it. It's like, Galaxy's Edge. Obviously, there's still movie stuff there.
Yeah.
But there were certainly a lot of opportunities to put attractions in that park that were movie related that went other places, that probably would have been a better fit there. Like why Monsters Inc. Laugh Floor is in Tomorrowland and not in Hollywood Studios, is a mystery for the ages. And there's some things that thematically would have been much better at Disney's Hollywood Studios, but it didn't happen. It kind of reminds me of Busch Gardens in some ways, where in Tampa, I'm not a humongous Busch Gardens fan, but it is fascinating how it started as we've got a brewery, and we're going to take a brewery, and then we're going to put a beer tasting thing there. And then, okay, we got a brewery and a beer tasting thing, and then let's put some flamingos in front. Oh, well, the flamingos are really good, so let's put some other birds. Maybe we'll build an aviary over here. Yeah, that's cool. What if I bought some lions? And we put some lions there. So we got brewery tasting room, flamingos, aviary, lions. Maybe we could have like a monorail so you could see the lions better. Yeah, okay, so we got that, and we could use a restaurant, and then maybe some trains, and it just grew in the most haphazard, organic fashion. And today it's this fully blown theme park, but when you talk about layout, it's the layout of that place is a freaking nightmare because it wasn't master planned. It just kind of grew. Right. and MGM was kind of, Hollywood Studios has kind of turned out the same way, where it was all right, well, you kind of had, you'd walk down Hollywood Boulevard and you'd make a left, and then everything was just kind of over there. And then when they added Sunset Boulevard, it kind of put in a whole nother, oh, well, now there's all this stuff over to the right that wasn't there. And then they're well, let's use this space that are in between these buildings that you were never supposed to walk through. And they just kind of added stuff where they could as the capacity for that park just kept getting bigger and bigger. There's a really funny old story, which, everyone's probably heard to death by now. But when they originally wanted to open that park, the story is they went, they knew it was about a half-day park, and the Disney survey people went out and talked to people to try to get a feel for interest level in it. And they said, okay, we have this park. It's probably going to take about 5 or 6 hours to go through. Would you pay $25 to go to that park? And people were no. They had to actually elevate the price to walk into the park to the same price as Epcot and the Magic Kingdom. And then people were interested in going. So they actually wanted to charge less initially because it was smaller, and they intended to keep it smaller. But people were not interested in going unless the cost to walk into the park was the same as the Magic Kingdom and Epcot, which is mind-blowing.
That's really weird.
But, yeah. Isn't that so strange? But I guess the feeling was well, if the thing is so cheap, it's there must not be any value in going there. So I would just rather not go. But once you tell me, it's at the same level as these other parks, okay, now I'm interested. Even though the attraction mix was literally the same attractions that it opened with. It was so popular, it had to grow. So it has grown in this very random way. And as stuff goes down, as you said, it's people seem to be no longer interested in the behind the scenes things. So stuff like Monster Sound Show and Superstar Television have gone away. They have to put stuff there. So now we have Path to the Force or whatever it is. And the poor animation studio, that I think was one of the greatest things there. Having, animators actually working there at the Disney Studios in Florida. It's to be able to walk through and see them working on actual movies. That was stunning. Nobody had that. And that was incredible. So when that got taken art, but some of the things were kind of the heart and soul of the park, got ripped out when Feature Animation Florida went away. And it's hard to walk away from that. And now, then it's well, now we have this giant space. What do we do? Oh, we'll have a meet and greet in there. And now it's launch bay. So yeah, I'm with you. I always feel there's a solution to make it cohesive and make it make sense. And, being crippled in Florida with not being able to do Marvel is fascinating because, that would be a very natural place to put those things. but it's not going to happen unless something changes very radically. Will there be Fox properties there one day? Maybe. Who knows, right? Like, that's a whole nother fascinating possibility, is like you could see attractions based on Fox shows in there now. Right? I mean,
they could do they could do a Simpsons ride there. It's so weird.
Yeah, they could.
Which they won't, but it's just funny. They could be like, well, which one's better?
Yeah.
Two things that you mentioned. One, the design of that park. You walk down Sunset Boulevard and you do those two attractions and you're like, now we got to walk all the way back. And it's I know that's just how they designed it, but it's like, it drives me crazy to have the dead ends. It used to be you'd walk down to the stunt show, not the Indiana Jones, the other one, and to be a dead end, you have to walk back. And I'm like, why? Oh. But the thing about it is, I think you could have like an entire amazing park just of attractions that were rumored to go there or were going to that never did, like all the Jim Henson stuff before he passed away.
Oh,
yeah. Great movie ride, Muppets, and all, or the Monsters Inc. coaster, or so many other things that have come. I mean, every park is like that, but I feel like because it's such a weird park, it even stands out. Or Roger Rabbit or Dick Tracy or whatever. There's so much.
Could you imagine if the Dick Tracy attraction was there? Like, what would they have done? Would they have done an overlay at some point? So. It's like, it's really interesting. Yeah, or if the Tower of Terror, if they had gone with like the more traditional like elevator drop ride, which was the first plan, that just had like sort of a light theming on it versus like what we have now. It's like, how different would that have been? I mean, what a breakthrough to come up with the idea that they did, ultimately do Tower of Terror with. But like, what if that was just a carnival drop ride with like a really nice skin around that? Would have the mystique that it had? Would that exist? And like, that was another thing that really changed that park for the positive. Is like when they opened up that attraction, I mean, MGM was off the chain. And like that was the park that everybody wanted to go. Yeah, Magic Kingdom was fun. It's like, yeah, Epcot is cultural, but like MGM was the bomb. It's like they had the best stuff there for that brief period up until the mid 90s, where like that was the park to be at. The nighttime show, Sorcery in the Sky with like the inflatable Mickey, and like they had that park had it going on.
Yeah, actually probably up until even when they opened Star Tours, and then they did Rock and Roller Coaster in 99, and even up to that point, because they still had some of the things obviously they had the Great Movie Ride, but they still had more. You look at that even as a recent, they still had part of the Backlot Tour, which kind of felt weird, but up into the early 2000s, it still had kind of a core of it. Yeah. And even animation wasn't what it was when they, especially when they got rid of the Robin Williams thing, and it was kind of really weird when you went in there, but it still had some of it. There was a core, but now you've got, it's funny you mentioned that day where you showed up and there was no one there. It makes me think of Galaxy's Edge at Disneyland right now a bit, where there was going to be these giant crowds and then they kind of didn't come. So I'm assuming that'll be a big hit, but now I look at it and I go, what if that's not a big hit? I think it will be more in Florida, and especially when the second attraction opens. But what if it's not? Or what if the Mickey and Minnie ride continues to have issues? It keeps getting delayed. That's almost an entirely separate podcast.
It is, yeah. I think there's a completely different set of behaviors. Like, it's a different ecosystem in Florida. Because like in Disneyland, and we'll try to make this brief because it is a completely separate. And I think other people have probably done this podcast better.
Oh, sure.
But like to boil it down, and I think into the simplest of factors, it's like, Disneyland, even though DCA is there, is still kind of like a standalone destination. Someone making a special trip for Star Wars land, for Galaxy's Edge to open, it's like they really seriously are making a trip just to see that one thing. And if they felt like, I would really like to wait until Rise of the Resistance is open, or everything I know about Disneyland is that it's super crowded, so there is no way that this is just not going to be a freaking nightmare if I go, opening week. So let's stay away and let the crowds die down. Whatever all of that is like, that is not going to happen in Florida. In Florida, when a new attraction opens, it typically steals from either another Disney park or one of the lesser area. For years, you would see, like something opens up in Animal Kingdom and then there's a dip at Disney MGM's attendance for that year. And then the next year they open up something at Disney MGM and then you see the attendance dip for Animal Kingdom. Or suddenly people stop going to SeaWorld as much as they used to so they can spend another day at Disney. It's like they kind of end up cannibalizing each other, but there are going to be so many people that are coming to Florida anyway when Galaxy's Edge opens up. If they don't do some kind of, timed entry system, it's like, it is gonna be a madhouse there. It's like, you're not going to see what we saw. I will be really shocked if we see what we saw in Disneyland there, unless it's by design, where they're only letting a limited number of people in for a certain amount of time. So that way it's just not overwhelming, which if that's the case, I'm all for that. That would be my best case scenario, because I know personal examples aren't always the best, but like when I knew that they were going to open up this stuff at Walt Disney World, I said to myself and my family, we are going to wait until the week after Labor Day in 2020 to go and see this, because it will give adequate time for any technical difficulties in the rides to be shaken out. And we will go in what is the traditional, like, lowest time of the year. So that way we're not waiting 90 minutes or 2 hours or 3 hours to try to get on these two rides, because I'm not going to do that. And especially now in Florida, where we're trained with fast passes and other things, that like the last thing you ever want to do is stand in a line. It's like, I am not going to go stand in a line. This is just not happening.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting. And the differences are definitely there. And I'm curious. I'm kind of kicking myself I didn't go to California during that like dead period, like right now.
Right. Yeah.
Because once the annual pass holders descend on that, forget about it. But right now I'm like, my goodness, in June, it would have been amazing. That would have been like the best time to ever go to that park.
Yeah. Even if you just wanted to go to Disneyland and you didn't even want to go to Galaxy's Edge, like that was phenomenal. Because we went, as when we went out to interview Rolly, we were there about a month before. And like TCA was like relatively empty. And we used the Max Pass system to try to get on as much things as possible. But like Disneyland was humming. It wasn't crazy like I've seen it before, in other times, but like it was genuinely busy. There were a lot of people there enjoying themselves. It wasn't oppressive, but like there were a lot of folks there. So it was really funny to not, like 1 month later, see many less people there than what we saw before, even on the weekend.
Yeah, it's going to be weird. Well, how I think... I feel like I wrote down all these topics and we hit on a few, but there was so many cool things to talk about. So, well, before we close, I did want to say, if you could offer any info, you've already kind of teased at it, what's coming up for the Retro Disney World podcast and everything else with the Lake Buena Vista Historical Society.
Well, let's see. We got Horizons out of the way. It's like that was a really big one. We really want to do a dive into Journey into Imagination sometime either this year or at the beginning of next year, because that's another big important ride. And I feel like we have the contacts now to talk to some of the people that worked on it, and we can get some really good insight, because that's one of my favorites. I think it was a brilliant attraction. I can't believe that it was torn down. There's a part of me that almost feels like the attractions, and this sounds weird for someone who's, loved Epcot for what it was, but because it was kind of a sponsored thing, I kind of felt like, there's by design, maybe stuff would last 10 or 12 years and then go away and be replaced by something else. Because, that's how the World's Fair would work. Even as like Horizons went and World of Motion went, it never occurred to me that they would touch Journey into Imagination, because that in its own right was like sort of a masterpiece. So we want to get into that. I really want to do another maybe 2-episode show about the feature animation in Florida and the studio tour, because there were a lot of great things that came through there. Some wonderful work that was done in Florida. And there's still a lot of people around that were either animators or people that worked on the attraction part of it, or were cast members who led it, that we can talk to. So I think we're going to get some really good insight from them. Gosh, we got a whole bunch of parks to go through. It's like there's so much stuff, and we may even go back to some of our early episodes, because have found out, over time, it's like we found out more things about other stuff that we didn't know. So it may be starting to be time to revisit things, but I feel like we could do this for a really long time, even though we're doing stuff from 20, 30 years ago. And we kind of have a ticking clock, and that we try to do things that are like 25 years old. And, new stuff falls into that time zone all the time. So we have some new things to do as the years go by as well.
Yeah, you're getting close to being able to do the Legend of the Lion King attraction from the Magic Kingdom.
Oh, yeah.
That weird puppet attraction. I don't know when that closed. I think you still got a little ways to go.
Yeah, that one, I don't know if we go by opening or closing, but that was good. I remember that was, again, that was a very, of the time, like that was a very surprising, but very cool little show.
All right, great. Well, so if people want to listen to your podcast or find out more about what you guys are doing, where should they go?
So go to retrowdw.com, and you can find, links to our picture galleries and our podcasts and our articles there. If you use iTunes, we're there, Overcast, whatever your, podcast application of choice. If you search for Retro WDW, you will, more than likely find us. We're on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook, and we have this large catalog of photos, and we've got like a bot that just kind of automatically will surface a couple of photos a day. So if you just want to see some old attraction stuff from time to time, it's like we'll fill up your social media feeds with like something pleasant to look at, in case there's some other unpleasant things in your social feeds, which tends to be the way things go today. So maybe that's a nice thing that you can experience. But yeah, those are the best places to find us.
Well, awesome. Well, Hal, thanks for doing this again. This was a blast, and it was really fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
If you enjoyed this show, you should check out episode 44, which was my first conversation with Hal Bowers, or episode 58, which was my talk with Brian P. Miles, who is Hal's co-host on the Retro Disney World podcast. You can find both at tomorrowsociety.com. I love hearing from you guys, so if you could email me, dan@tomorrowsociety.com, if you have any questions or thoughts about the show. You can also follow me on Twitter at tomorrowsoc, or Facebook or Instagram at tomorrowsociety. If you'd like to support this listener-funded podcast, you can go to tomorrowsociety.com/member to learn about how you can help out through Patreon and receive some really cool perks, including access to the full Tomorrow Society Bulletin monthly podcast. This month, I'm talking about my hopes for the D23 Expo at the end of August. You can also leave a rating or review through Apple Podcasts, which helps a lot to spread the word, which I really appreciate, and it makes a big difference to keep the show moving forward. The Tomorrow Society podcast is hosted, produced, and edited by Dan Heaton. The music was written by Adam Hookey and performed by the Sophisticated Babies. Thank you so much for listening. I will talk to you again very soon.